Подивіться лишень добре, прочитайте знову тую славу.
The Encyclopedia of Ukraine is designed to fill the needs of the English-speaking world, of those, whether they're members of the Ukrainian community, whether they're international diplomats, financiers, businessmen, academics, journalists, or the general public, who want information accurate, objective, up-to-date about Ukraine, its history, traditions, culture, natural resources. It is a resource, as we approach the 21st century, a resource to create international understanding, and it is a resource on which to base international peace. The Encyclopedia of Ukraine dates back to December 1976, when the Shevchenko Scientific Society, Naukowe Towarzystwo imienia Shevchenko of Sarcelles, France, signed an agreement with the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Alberta, enabling the Institute to proceed working on an English language encyclopedia. These two were soon joined by the Canadian Foundation for Ukrainian Studies, whose function was to secure funding to subsidize publication of the encyclopedia. There was also an equally important fourth partner, the University of Toronto Press, one of the major academic publishing houses of the world, and that is the publisher of the encyclopedia today. However, all these efforts could not have taken place without the work, the dedication, the dynamic, the energy of one man, and that man was Professor Володимир Кубійович.
Професор Кубійович був дуже цікавою людиною. І, значить, його найбільший талант, мені здається, було, що не тільки, що він був науковцем, але що він мав організаційні здібності. Кубійович мав дуже багато знайомих і приятелів. Хоч праця над енциклопедією відбувалася в Сарселі, по цілому світі були допоміжні групи. Такою одною групою, яка входила в акцію С, акцію Сарсель, був патронат НТШ, який в Канаді був під довголітнім проводом директора Євгена Бориса. Він збирав гроші для енциклопедії і тим самим розповсюджував роботу і знання про Кубійовича по цілій Канаді. Ну, Кубійович започаткував цю цілу працю. Він зрозумів, що переїхавши, більшість науковців, які переїхали в англомовний світ, і англомовний світ став головним світом науковим, треба було, значить, створити ту енциклопедію англомовну. Мені здається, що Кубійович був дійсно заскочений і захоплений появою першого тому. Це дуже довго тривало, і як в кінці він появився, це була дуже велика подія. Він, як тут приїхав, він дістав в руки той перший том, потримав його, каже, ах, це моя дитина, нарешті появилася на світ. In 1980, when I had my first sabbatical, my wife convinced me, and it was suggested by Director Boris that Sarcelles needed help, convinced me that we should go spend our sabbatical in France. And we ended up in Paris and lived in Paris, but worked in Sarcelles every morning, every day of the year of sabbatical. And it was a strange experience because I was there sort of out of the blue, thrust into working on encyclopedia with a very demanding boss, which Kubijovich was. But I think it showed him and it showed me that I could help. He believed that I could help, and I believed that I could help, and that, of course, dragged me into an encyclopedia. That's how it all began with me. Then, when we were working on the second volume, and we were running out of time, I realized that if I brought my people to the source where it was being done, because it was done in Ukrainian, and it had to be translated, and it had to be sent to us by mail, it would be better if we all went there, and there, without any interruptions from the outside world, we could sit down and get as much of the material ready as possible. So I decided to pack up the whole crew, got the money from the foundations, and off we went to France.
Під час нашого побуту в Сарселю ми головно перекладали гасла до другого тому і збирали нові матеріали до наступних гасел, що ми планували в Торонті приготувати. Я займався головно перекладами. Мав перед собою малий комп'ютер, в якому записував свої переклади, і пізніше, при кінці дня, ці переклади ми пересилали телефонічно до Торонто. А в Сарселю є надзвичайно багата бібліотека старих видань і журналів. Дуже вартісна бібліотека. І було дуже мені цікаво вечір за вечором переглядати, перечитувати старі видання, про які я десь бачу згадку, але ніколи не тримав у своїх руках, і яких тут в Канаді не можна знайти.
I think it was very important that we went to Sarcelles for another reason, because it gave Kubiovich a chance to see how in fact we worked. And I think he was feeling, as all older people do, that his life is not going to go on forever. And I think that what I felt from him, and we had many meetings and talks while we were there, I felt from him that he finally realized that his baby, his child, his work, his life's work, has found a stepfather, because he sort of relaxed and let us do it. And it was a very sort of calm and easy way of saying, okay, you have the mandate, go with it.
It's exactly as Bogdan wrote it. So we'll put that
Dan
in.
wrote that?
Yeah, Kravchenko. Okay.
Telegraph communications.
And view?
Telegraph or telephone?
Telegraph.
Telegraph communication.
Okay, so Ukrainian SSR becomes Ukraine.
Okay.
Well, essentially, the office was responsible for preparing new entries that had to go into the encyclopedia, writing and researching them. Secondly, editing entries that were written by the office staff, and also entries that were written by people outside the office, the scholars who contributed to it, to make sure that everything that they wrote was consistent in style and in content with everything else that was in the encyclopedia. And finally, also putting together the photographs and the illustrations and things that went into the volume, getting them prepared for publication, checking them to make sure that we had the appropriate entries, and putting in the right illustrations with them. In 1986, we made a large investment into computer technology. We got computers to write entries on, to use as a database to keep details together about all the different entries, and to actually do the editing and preparation final manuscript for the University of Toronto.
Well, every encyclopedia has an editorial board. The reason ours was international is because of the nature of the project. It had a member from Sarcelles, from NTH, Professor Zhukovsky. It had a member from CIUS, from Alberta, Professor Kravchenko, first Lupul, then Kravchenko, then Sisson, as they changed the directors. And it had a member who was not from the institutions, but from the states, who was representing the sciences. We needed a scientist, and that was Professor Bilanyuk from Swarthmore. The main function of a subject editor is, of course, to represent the subject. And we found people who knew the area, who would be specialists in a given field, whether it be physics, chemistry, art, but not only in the field, but had to have a knowledge about Ukraine in that field. And a very good example of such an editor in Toronto is Daria Derevich, who took care of the art field.
When I was first approached to become art editor, I was in fact continuing some of the work started by Mr. Sviatoslav Hordensky, the art editor of the first two volumes. And the innovation that I tried to introduce was asking art historians from Ukraine to contribute in writing some of the art entries. And such people as Serhiy Bilokin, Valentina Ruban, Dmitro Stepovek were some of the art historians who, in fact, agreed to contribute art entries to the encyclopedia.
One of the most important things that has to be done outside of the office is the preparation of maps. That's a costly process. And we were lucky that at this time, Mrs. Stefania Kuchrishin had just retired from the cartography department of the University of Alberta, and she agreed voluntarily, without pay, to do all these maps for us, both colored and black and white. This was a tremendous help.
What really makes the Encyclopedia of Ukraine stand out is the special care that has gone into that project. Quality checks had been provided in order to produce the best quality from some very old pictures, which were very hard to reproduce, but new technologies allowed us to bring out the best in the images. It is nice to see a big project like that come to conclusion, and we are especially proud of the teamwork that had gone in. Production people talked directly to the editor-in-chief. All of the people worked very, very closely together, and they can be very, very proud to see that book come out in the fall of 1993.
The participation in this achievement of the Canadian Foundation for Ukrainian Studies depended on the time and talent of the men and women who volunteered to work for the Federation. What did they do? They collected money, lobbied government, administered funds, marketed the encyclopedia. Their work was coordinated by the Federation presidents, Dr. Lou Malosky of Winnipeg, immediate past president, John Stasiuk of Vancouver, tireless and enthusiastic, traveled throughout Canada and the States on behalf of the encyclopedia. Peter Saverin of Edmonton, who was there when the Federation was incorporated. Boris Rudzik of Toronto. The first president was Stanley Frolick, who was succeeded by Walter Tarnopolsky.
In 1976, Peter Saverin and I set out across Canada to all the business and professional clubs. And therein was one of the great moments of my life, because working with Saverin was just an incredible opportunity. Well, I think there's no question that it was really worth it. The very appearance of the encyclopedia in the English language is extremely important, both for the West and, I hope, in Ukraine. And all one has to do is see the tribulations that the Ukrainians have with the Russianized parts of Ukraine, with the propaganda that's coming out of Russia, to see that this is something that had to be done. And I'm very happy to see that what we planned is now achieved.
I'm very privileged to have been associated with this wonderful project over many years as the director of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. The Institute's role in this project was to provide basic management framework, and of course a very substantial portion of our budget was allocated to the encyclopedia project. But huge credit deserves to be paid to Manoli Lupul, who saw this encyclopedia through its most difficult period, because the encyclopedia was a meeting place of the old Ukrainian emigre scholarly community and the new Ukrainian scholarly community. It was a difficult transition to achieve. Manoli ensured that it was achieved. The significance of this project will only be appreciated in the years ahead. What, above all, it did was to standardize knowledge about Ukraine. This is a project that normally independent states accomplish, huge academies of science. That this was done, and done primarily by the Ukrainian Canadian community, is really something of great historical value.
Conceived of parents who found havens in the displaced persons camps of Europe, the Encyclopedia of Ukraine was born in a young, dynamic Canada. It was nurtured by over 400 scholars scattered over the globe, and introduced to the world by Canadian Ukrainians through the Canadian Foundation for Ukrainian Studies. Assistance also came from the provinces of Alberta, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, British Columbia, and the Government of Canada. Turning its pages, one begins to sense the variety. humor, energy, and pathos of the people and country that were and are Ukraine. It restores the collective memory of a nation reborn and points the way to a new and glorious future. The Encyclopedia of Ukraine.